Welcome again to another lecture, video lecture in consumer behavior. This book, remember? This book is what we're studying. And so far we've talked about perception, we've talked about learning and memory and how to get things into Charlie or Charlene's brain. We've talked about motivation and values and how that affects your purchase decisions. We've talked about self and self-concept. And we've talked about personality and lifestyle. And last time we broached the subject of attitudes and how they pervasively affect consumer behavior. Of video lectures, kind of five chapters. We're going to do chapters 8 through 12. We'll call them the red shirt lectures, just for fun. And we're going to go through them really quickly. But of course, all of them, as you know, as all topics in consumer behavior and everything in this course, each chapter goes much deeper in the text, and you can explore the concepts even further on your own time. Attitude change and interactive communications. So, as you know, changing attitude is difficult, but we're going to just touch on it in this lecture. Right? We may have touched on this before. First thing is just, how do attitudes change? If we want to change attitudes towards our product or product category, how do you do it? There's these 6 concepts the book talks about: reciprocity, the authority, so I can tell you that you should change, and if you believe in that, maybe you'll follow it. There's liking, you like me, you like my product, you like the brand, you like something associated with the brand. Make that association, the brand that you don't like, associate it with something you do like. Scarcity. Make something difficult to get, and sometimes that will change your attitude towards it. Must be important if nobody has it. Consistency, and that can include consistency with your values and your lifestyle that you've chosen. And finally, consensus. Everybody's doing it. We're going to talk about the communications model and ultimately how that will impact Charlie or Charlene's decision making. So the classical communications model has a sender who is, in our instance, would be our client. And then our craft is in the middle of this thing, the encode and the transmit functions, where we decide what we're going to say and how we're going to say it and what medium we're going to deliver it on. And then ultimately, what I've added here to some models is the perceptual barrier, which you're familiar with by now. And it has some openings that the messages may or may not get through depending upon their connection with, ultimately with the consumer's needs or wants at that particular time. The communications model is closed with the feedback loop at the end, which could be sales, it could be sentiment analysis of social media, it could be whatever your metrics are. You're trying to determine, whether the message got through or not. By the way, the same model basically applies in interpersonal communications, where the feedback includes things like nonverbal and tone of voice and all that good stuff. About one part of that model, the source. As we've discussed briefly before, and I think you guys know something about this, is the idea of source credibility. So the same words by different people can have very different meanings. Our source is sometimes a spokesperson for our product, sometimes it's a celebrity. What really makes a good source is their credibility to the target audience. The source's perceived expertise in the product category and general trustworthiness. And, the source doesn't have to be a known source. Put a white jacket on somebody and they become a doctor. And so you can insinuate source as well. The book also talks about this idea of hype versus buzz and sort of begins to touch upon internet marketing, which I don't think the text covers very well at all, because of course when the book was written in 2007, the internet was still young and social media was just starting to happen. So, but they do touch on some of this stuff, and the hype versus buzz argument, I think, is a fairly good one. So the idea being that hype is advertising, it's overt, it's corporate, it's generally perceived as being fake, and viewed with skepticism, whereas buzz is more of a word of mouth thing, and it's covert, it's grassroots, it has some authenticity. So the question with how do we as marketers create buzz as opposed to hype means that we have to sort of change our model a little bit, and it's no longer just selling the product, but it's providing some value in an authentic way that people know where it's coming from, and that association is part of the positive buzz, but that you're actually providing value. And collectively, I think this is beginning to be called content marketing. Marketing means taking advantage of the new social media tools, writing blog posts, for instance, video blogging, podcasting, syndicating your content through RSS, participating in virtual worlds, even creating virtual worlds, sponsoring them, tweeting. All these vehicles are used to provide content of interest and or value to your target audience. So, today's assignment is to find examples of content marketing and to post them in the advertising Facebook group. This chapter also starts to get into some stuff around sending the message, which I think is probably the type of thing you're studying in advertising, the core course. The most important feature being, what do? You stress the unique selling proposition or the unique product attribute. That visuals will communicate emotion better than words do, typically. Your verbal message, your logical argument comes across in words and diagrams and that type of thing. The book touches on the need for repetition for learning. We learned that in the learning segment. And also presents this neat little graphic chart here, the two-factor theory, that kind of demonstrates that at some point the net effect goes negative. So if you keep putting the same message in front of the same people, they start to get alienated. They start to get pissed off with it. So this is why you might want to look at the repetition with variation option. So when you have several ads, all saying more or less the same thing, but coming at it from different angles so that your audience doesn't get bored with it. Bit of a discussion around when you're making an argument in an ad. Do you just be one-sided and say nothing but supportive stuff, positive stuff, completely ignore anything that might go against your argument? Or do you take a two-sided sort of fair-based approach where you present both positive and negative information and you hope the consumer will weigh them and come out on the positive side? Use a logical full argument. It all depends on the situation. If you're trying to attract new consumers, then the two-sided argument might be a good idea because they're already skeptical and you need to take them through the process. Should you draw an explicit conclusion for the consumer is another variable that sometimes you want to, sometimes you don't. And the book talks about basically the message being, if the message is personally relevant to me and you want me to really internalize it, then don't spell out the conclusion for me. Let me come to it myself. That'd be a higher degree of involvement. But if the argument's a little hard to follow or I'm really not that motivated, then you want to just maybe be a little bit more direct about it. And if you're gonna err on one side, err on the direct side. This chapter also deals with appeals, and I know you've dealt with this: the rational versus emotional appeal, sex as an appeal, sex appeal, humor as an appeal, and fear as an appeal. And so there's some interesting stuff in the book on that, but I'm not going to go into it because I know you've covered it. Okay, now it's time for the ELM, the Elaboration Likelihood Model. I'm not sure where they get these names for these models, but we're going to talk about it anyway because the book references it, the tests reference it. The ELM. Which is a process, again, of course. In fact, it's a two-path process. It assumes that Charlie or Charlene, our consumer, has received the message, and we're through the perceptual barrier. They are contemplating it. They are going to process this message, and the ELM basically says there are two general paths. So one they call high involvement processing, and one they call low involvement processing. The high involvement processing part of the ELM is known as the central route, where it's the typical, there it is, there's the argument, I process it in my brain, my belief change, my attitude change, my behavior then changes. As we've explored in other lectures, the think, feel, do model, for instance, and how that can get flipped around on you, the peripheral route's a little bit more like that, where there's low involvement processing, and my belief changes because it probably wasn't that strong to begin with, and my behavior changes, and then following my behavior is attitude change. And this path, in fact, in some research has been shown to change attitudes more effectively, where you don't actually address the attitude, you address the behavior. Ask people and convince them and motivate them to change their behavior. The attitude will follow. Interesting.